The Batman Arkham games are amazing, but not perfect, so today we will be looking at the biggest issues of each of the games. Some of these issues are so small that you probably didn't even notice them during your playthrough, but some of these issues are big, such as characters in the game that I felt weakened the story and interrupted the flow. Be sure to like and subscribe, and let's get started. Although I am a huge Batman Arkham Asylum fan, I'm also not delusional, and I understand that this game is not perfect. Honorable mentions that are bad but not too bad is the Return to Arkham remaster phase, as I'm not sure what they were really going for with this, but also the combat felt a bit clunky, but I guess in a way it's a more realistic version of the free flow combat, but sometimes it just doesn't seem to click, which makes it feel a bit inconsistent and can take a while to get into the flow of it if you haven't played the game in a while. I'm sure the combat was great for the time, but Arkham Asylum is kind of in a bad spot where the combat in the later games is so much smoother, which makes Asylum's combat feel a lot more clunkier, although I would say Asylum's combat is still better than a lot of the combat in other superhero games. Something more obvious, and I think is the main issue with Arkham Asylum, is the lack of side missions, which personally I think is a huge shame, as if you're like me when you first beat the game, probably expected something to do after beating the main game, but no, it's just a bunch of Riddler trophies if you didn't bother to collect them before beating Joker. Now, I would have loved to have seen some side missions like Mad Hatter, who was meant to originally be in the game, some murder mysteries that were meant to be in the game which we found in some cut content, or maybe something like Clayface or Prometheus that would have given us something different. It's so disappointing, as I want to play Arkham Asylum even more, but you end up really just replaying the main story or the challenge maps that they provided. Something even the makers of Arkham Shadow, who are Camouflage Studios, even pointed out in a recent interview, is that there's a lack of thugs in the endgame of Arkham Asylum, and that kinda makes the game feel a bit empty, as there's only a few lunatics wandering around that you may find the odd time. Something cool what they could have done is by making the endgame be set just before the last boss fight, which is done in plenty of other games. Like the top of my head I can think of Dying Light 1, so that there are still inmates running around the asylum and it would still make sense in the story, as Batman hasn't defeated Joker yet. Batman Arkham City is considered one of the best superhero games of all time. I don't have too many issues with the game in my eyes anyway, but some honourable mentions would have to be too many Riddler trophies. But honestly, if you're in no rush to beat them, then it's not too big of a deal. And maybe the effort with dealing with the jammers in the Penguin section, where you need to destroy all of them in order to get access to the museum, which was a bit boring and honestly not a big deal. But this issue is a big issue, which is the Catwoman DLC, which has a major impact on the story and gameplay. My issue with the DLC is that it feels a bit forced in there, like they were ordered to make this DLC to sell rather than to expand the story. Now, the DLC has a good start where we get to see how Two-Face ended up capturing Catwoman, but that's about it really. The issue starts at the time where we get this dramatic scene where it ends on a cliffhanger, where Joker and Harley take out Batman, and before we find out what happens to Batman and find out about Joker's blood, we have to go through this pretty boring Catwoman section where you need to gather your gear from your apartment and then head to Poison Ivy's lair to end on another cliffhanger. Now, she doesn't appear in the game until a good bit later on, but just as Batman is trapped under rubble with Protocol 10 starting and Joker finding out about the Lazarus Pit, we have to cut to Catwoman, who is robbing a bank, which just doesn't seem that interesting or important, especially with the situation that Batman is in currently. It's a good explanation on how Catwoman found Batman to save him, but I feel like they could have made Catwoman more involved with the story, like maybe helping Batman multiple times by collecting information or something similar to that. She again has her own section after the end of the main story where you have to beat up Two-Face in a boss battle in order to get your riches. But when I first played this as a kid, The boss fight was so difficult and it took me ages to complete, which was worse because I couldn't free roam as Batman until this section was done. I feel like a better way to do this would have been to still keep the Catwoman free roaming for people who bought the DLC and the Catwoman trophies, but put the story DLC as an option, similar to how you would for the Harley Quinn's Revenge DLC. Another issue with Catwoman is her combat, which doesn't really feel that great in my personal opinion. It's a lot slower and leaves you a lot more vulnerable and open to getting hit more often, especially with her ground takedowns. I think it's because we don't really spend much time with her compared to Batman, so we don't really get time to learn how she plays and get used to her movement. Obviously not the worst thing in the world, and it's pretty easy to disable on PC, so I don't mind it too much, but it's definitely my pick for the worst issue in Batman Arkham City. Batman Arkham Origins is a game that has been getting a lot of praise in recent times, but doesn't mean it's perfect. This is an honourable mention, but definitely very prevalent in Arkham Origins, which is bugs, and there are a whole heap of them, not just for me personally, but I know a lot of people who experience it. Stuff like inconsistent combat, save corruption, which I actually got myself in my first playthrough on the PS3 when I was 50% into the game, so that was super frustrating. Killer Croc going invisible majority of the time when playing the PC version of Arkham Origins. And lastly, the crashes, which mainly happen during or after the fight with Bane, or sometimes when I hit an explosive barrel. But the main issue I find that probably 50-50 people are split on is the big reveal that Joker was the main villain all along and was pretending to be Black Mask. Although this could be a great twist, and it does set up Joker and Batman's relationship quite well, I still kind of feel like it would have been nice to have a game where Joker doesn't take over the show. It would have been really fun to have Joker as a side mission or a side plot, and then have the real Black Mask controlling everything, just to give us someone new, as it does feel like we've only scratched the surface with Batman's Rogues Gallery, which is a shame, as I would love to see more of Black Mask, as back in Arkham Asylum when it first released, I found his mask in Dr. Young's office, which was really cool, as at the time I didn't even know who that character was back then, and in Arkham City we get to see him again at the start of the game and on posters around Gotham. So then in Arkham Origins, having this villain that we have seen multiple times in previous Arkham games finally take center stage would have been really cool, but I'm sure Warner Brothers probably worried that if Joker wasn't the main villain, then the game wouldn't do well or sell well. Black Mask did get a side mission in Arkham Origins and was the main villain of Red Hood's DLC in Arkham Knight, but it still was a real wasted opportunity in my opinion. Batman Arkham Knight is the final game of the Rocksteady trilogy and isn't safe from criticism. An honourable mention for the issues with Batman Arkham Knight has to be the boss battles, which honestly are pretty bad and quite forgettable, such as Nightwing in the Harley Quinn DLC pack, Deathstroke's tank battle, and even the Arkham Knight boss battle weren't particularly interesting for me personally anyway. And honestly, I think I would take Titan Joker over nearly all of the Batman Arkham Knight boss fights, which is a shame as we saw Arkham's boss fights progress from Asylum to Origins, and then just seems to take a bit of a nosedive in terms of quality when it comes to Knight. Another small issue that I'd like to mention is the medics, and this could just be a skill issue, but I find them super annoying how they revive people, and when you actually see them running to revive someone, your path to them is usually blocked, so the person you just knocked out is back up again, which can be really frustrating. The main issue for Batman Arkham Knight though, I would have to say, is the side missions, and yes, there are some good ones, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the base side missions of Arkham Knight are way too repetitive. The firefighter's side mission being a good example, as I felt it was just very copy-paste, which is pretty bad when you think they already did this back in 2011 with the repetitive acts of violence missions. Man-Bat's side mission does really suffer from repetition also, which is a shame as it starts off really well in my opinion with the Man-Bat jump scare and seeing the lab destroyed. Taking down the militia was fine, but there was a lot of repetition which I think would have been fine if it wasn't for the fact that we got this awful copy-paste Deathstroke boss fight at the end of it all. Firefly's side mission was extremely repetitive also, which is a shame as he actually was quite good in Origins. So seeing him just be something you have to chase in the Batmobile a few times and beat up was pretty disappointing. There wasn't any story or character development, it just kind of felt last minute really. Luckily, Batman Arkham Knight did get the Season of Infamy, which is a DLC pack that added a lot more story and definitely an improvement over the base DLC. So if you haven't for some reason not played Arkham Knight or don't own the Season of Infamy, then I would highly recommend buying it. Apparently some of the Season of Infamy DLC villains were meant to be in the base game, but due to time restrictions they had to move it to the DLC pack. So it would have been interesting to see which villains from the DLC would have been in the base game, which could have greatly improved it, especially if it was something like the Mr. Freeze side mission. The 2024 game Batman Arkham Shadow deserves to be on this list, but as some haven't played the game yet, this will have no spoilers in this section. An honourable mention is that it is a VR game, and although I love it, I thought it was a shame that it was locked to a MetaQuest 3 and 3S, as the majority of people don't want to pay at least $330 in order to play a game. For me personally, I haven't touched the MetaQuest 3 apart from when I play Arkham Shadow, so $330 for one game seems like a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people are in the same boat as me. The main issue with Batman Arkham Shadow, in my personal opinion, is actually the same as Asylum with the lack of side missions. The game does do better here though, as there are a lot more collectibles to find than Arkham Asylum, but it feels like it took a step back due to not having side missions and lacking challenge maps that could have made up for it really. I feel like Rocksteady learnt their lesson from not having side missions in Asylum, so Arkham Shadow not having them either is a bit annoying. Now there are rumours of DLC and I believe there are challenge maps confirmed to be added, so I guess we just have to wait to find out. Obviously this video doesn't mean I hate the Arkham games, and these aren't really huge deals in my opinion. If you disagree with my points or have any other issues that weren't mentioned in the video, I would appreciate if you commented your thoughts down below. Be sure to like and subscribe. That's all for now. My name is Foeinform.